I'm a fairly reliable person and have no real reason to make this up. I was also sober when I saw this. In the summer of 2015, friends and I were out in the middle of nowhere in Missouri, looking for ghosts. We had been looking for a place to do an EVP session, and had finally found the perfect spot. It was a little used gravel road that turned off into another little used gravel road, hidden by thicker trees. There was even an older house on the other side of the forest border. We parked in front of this abandoned house next to the tree line, facing west toward a large field. This was right around 9:40 p.m. We gathered around a fire that we had built. We were there for about an hour, telling ghost stories and trying to make something happen. Finally, it was probably closer to about 11 p.m., we turned off all the lights in the car and sat staring in the field with night vision goggles that my friend was borrowing from work. After maybe about another hour, everybody at this point was pretty lax. We were talking and joking around. I happened to be looking right out of the car, towards the tree line, when I see this large black figure that swooped down from the trees and fly over the field. It was huge and had large bat-like wings, much larger than any bat I'd ever seen. The wingspan alone had to have at least been 10 feet. I remember all of us seeing it, screaming. We weren't sure what to do. We floored the car and drove away. I don't think any of us slept at all that night. We pulled away about 10 minutes down the road, got out and tried to ascertain what we saw. None of us could believe what we had just seen. I put it out of my mind for about a week or so, until I started seeing articles online about giant bats attacking people here in Missouri. I can't remember which article it was now. It might have been one of the articles that author John Keel wrote, but there were several human victims who claimed to have been attacked by giant bats in the 80s and early 90s. These people all described wings that were 5 to 10 feet wide. We also had with us a Ouija board that we were planning to use in conjunction with an EVP to see if we could connect to any spirits. We never did end up using it, but I almost wonder if that board is the reason we saw what we did. I wonder if we had somehow summoned that bat thing, or maybe it was just curious about us. I can't help but think that it might have been a demonic entity. Has anybody out there seen anything remotely like what we did? Anything similar? I know winged and flying humanoids are a thing, but I just can't help but think that they're all demonic. When I was young, my grandmother always scared me with stories of El Chupacabra. We're originally from Puerto Rico, moved here to Missouri when I was very little, so pretty much everybody has heard of them. I was never really that scared of it because I knew in my deep subconscious it could not be real. According to my grandmother, it's a creature the size of a bear with spines down its back, as well as large fangs. It came after little kids who played outside for too long or did not listen to their elders. At least, that's what my G-Ma told me. Even though I didn't believe it, every time I was late home or I talked back to my grandma, I would get that fear in my bones from the Chupacabra hurting me, or something. I remember this distinctly. So, on my 11th birthday, my parents were both working, so my grandma baked me a cake. I had some friends over at her house, so I could have a party, but she was still able to look after us. The party was really nice, and everybody had a good time. That night, I went to sleep later than usual, with good reasons obviously, because some of the kids left really late. I always slept with the door closed at my grandma's place, so that night, I closed it as well. Just as I was falling asleep, I heard something at the window. It was like tree branches were hitting it, being moved by the wind. I didn't pay that much attention to it and just ignored it. The second time, something hit my window really hard and I figured I had to check it out at what was going on outside. I wish I had not gone to the window, because when I did, I saw something that left me terrified for the rest of my life. Across the street from my grandma's house, there were some bushes. When I looked, they were shaking and it seemed like somebody was hiding behind them or something. And just as I was about to turn around and go to sleep, it came out. It was a huge creature that looked exactly like the stories my grandmother told me about, of the Chupacabra. I screamed, ran to my grandparents' room to tell them what I saw, and get them to scare the monster away. I was just a kid, so I really believed that my grandmother thought the Chupacabra existed, and when she told me it wasn't real, I tried to convince her with all my power that it was. When they came to my window to see what I was talking about, this thing was gone. They did not believe me, no matter how hard I tried to convince them, and now I understand them. I would not believe a kid with something like that either. Kids have a great imagination, but I can only wish I had imagined it. I did not want to sleep at my grandma's anymore. I was afraid I would see it again. 2 weeks had passed since this happened, and only one day I was walking home alone from my school since my parents were both working and could not pick me up. It was getting dark, and even though I had kind of forgotten about what had happened, I was still a little scared to be walking alone, and for good reason, apparently. Just as I was supposed to pass the nearby park, I heard something from behind. There were strange noises and loud footsteps. I was afraid to turn around and speed up, so I would get further away from it. But it sped up with me and kept following. I started running as my house was just around the corner, but it started running too. Somehow, I made it into my house. I locked the door as soon as I got in. I did not even notice when I lost it or even what it was. At no point did I have the courage to turn around, and maybe it's better that I didn't. I probably wouldn't be able to handle what happened later. We were on a school trip to the nearby lake. It was like a one-day field trip type thing, and all my friends were going. I didn't know how or why, but I kept forgetting about the scary things that were happening to me. It was probably because I was a kid and didn't take it seriously. If all this happened now, I wouldn't even know how to act. So, the field trip was mostly spending time in the bus, and when we got there, we all got lunch boxes and an hour to explore the area around the lake. But there was no going into the forest or far away, where the teachers could not see us. My friends and I played tag, and we got caught up in that. We didn't even notice we were in the woods. As I realized it, fear had come over me, and I got paralyzed. When suddenly, we had heard the teacher calling for us and approaching the woods, so everybody quickly ran out of the woods. As I was running, I noticed a butterfly. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I tried to catch it, but I couldn't get to it because it was too fast. My friend Damien called out to me as he was exiting the woods. I yelled that I would be right out. I slowed my steps. The danger was gone, as the teacher saw we were all okay. At that exact moment, a branch had broke from behind me, and as a reflex, I turned around. I saw what I saw from my grandma's window that night. That's all I remember before waking up in the hospital. I fainted. They found me at the entry of the forest by the tree line. They had asked me what had happened and why I was lying on the ground unconscious. I told them. They did not believe me. Some kids even made fun of me at school because of what I said. All I know is that I'm now 30, but I still know that somewhere out there, a Chupacabra is probably waiting to hurt me. I have a scientific background. I'm reasonably intelligent and rational. I try not to be gullible. I'm not a nut, and I don't have a wild imagination. However, this experience alone was so unusual. I don't know what to make of it. Two people, my wife and I, were driving down on a rural highway near St. Louis in the early evening hours of August 10th, 2002, when we both saw a large owl-like creature perched on a utility pole about 60 yards ahead of us. The creature was completely white, about the size of a large bird, with a 6-foot wingspan. It had a round head and large eyes. My wife mentioned it, how odd it looked, and the fact that it was perched strangely. The closer we got, we could just see how frightening it looked and how strange it looked. We were both startled, and my wife even screamed. The creature flew off into the night sky and we drove onward to our destination, discussing what we had just seen. We both agreed that it wasn't a bird. It wasn't an ordinary person either. It was definitely something other. We get to our destination about 10 minutes later, talking about the creature. My wife said she wanted to turn around and go back so she could show me the exact spot where the creature had perched on the pole. I agreed. We turned around. We drove back the way we had come and couldn't find the creature or the utility pole. We were both very shaken up by what we had just seen. Now, I'll try my best to give the best description of the creature from memory. White feathers, sort of glimmering white. Big round head with large eyes that seemed to glow from within. A round body with a lanky torso, and 2 legs with what appeared to be webbed feet. I did not notice arms, but it was dark, so I could have missed them if they were tucked close to the body. Wings that didn't flap in flight. Rather, they seemed to be more gliding or floating. At the moment of the initial sighting, my wife said it reminded her of an owl, but I didn't see that resemblance because I wasn't expecting to fly off when we approached. If I'd seen it perched, I may have described it as an owl. The wings were something closer to 6 feet. The eyes also seemed strange, and to have this glow like an inner light. It was very strange. Even now I think back to this creature, I get a chill. I'm not the type to believe in anything paranormal, but this was very, very strange for both of us. I come from Nevada, for those who don't know what that means. The state is huge, but there isn't anything really special to see here. Most of the land is barren, and there aren't many trees, only bushes and the occasional grassland. I've now since moved to Missouri, where I've had a host of strange, terrifying things happen, but before I get to that, let me tell you that Nevada is hell on earth in the summer. Very few shades and dry heat, and I can't stand the sun. Living here during summer makes me feel like somebody stuffed me in an oven, leaving me to die. There are lots of great places for camping though, and sometimes I and a few friends would pack up our gear and pitch a tent for the night. We would only spend one night outside and pack up before dawn because, as I said, the heat can be too much to handle. Now, after moving to Missouri, I stuck with those same friends. We planned to spend more than one night. We packed up everything we could think of and tried to look for the shadiest, coolest place possible to make our camp. We set up our camping spot far away from any civilization. This way, nobody could ever bother us and kept our rides close by. This way we can cool off in the car tomorrow. About halfway through the night, one of my friends and I decided to go for a hike around the area. Now, it was a full moon, and since there weren't many trees, everything was pretty well lit. We walked in circles for about an hour, talking about life and whatnot, when suddenly we heard a cry in the distance. It sounded like a person pleading for their life. It was coming behind just a small hill just ahead of us. We couldn't really make out what the person was saying, but somebody was definitely in trouble. We knew that running to a random sound in the middle of the night wasn't exactly the smartest idea. So, we started slowly sneaking towards the place the sound had come from. We made it to the top of a small hill, but there was no signs of anybody. We were certain that we did not imagine the sound, but did not want to push our luck. We turned around to head back. Just then, we heard something yet again. This time, we could hear almost somebody trying to scream for help, but the sound was muffled, like somebody was holding a hand over the person's mouth. This time, the sound wasn't too far from us, and we could see the bushes from where it was coming from. Keep in mind that these aren't the bushes like you have in your backyard. They are over 4 feet tall, and can scratch you pretty good if you run through them. We sneaked close to the bushes to try and figure out what was going on, but the plea for help stopped. The next thing we heard made both of us freeze in place and freak out. The call for help suddenly turned into maniacal laughter. At first it was quiet, but it grew louder and more intense. The worst part is, it did not sound like a human. It resembled a hyena's laughter, which I've only heard on TV. We took a few steps back from the bushes, and before we could make a run for it, some weird-looking creature poked its head out of the bushes. It was a little smaller than a donkey, and it had a body that looked like somebody mixed a German shepherd with a hyena, but its fur had a strange red pattern on it. If that wasn't terrifying enough, its teeth looked like they all could not fit inside its mouth. The fangs were long and sharp, and they were sticking out, even when the creature's mouth was closed. We slowly walked backward, and the creature emerged from the bushes. Its appearance became even weirder after we could see its legs. You would expect an animal like this to have paws and sharp claws, but instead, we could see hooves, strong like ram hooves. While walking out, the creature was laughing uncontrollably, and that sound made us even more terrified. Somehow, we both knew that we could not outrun this thing, and we started screaming for help, hoping that at least our other friends could hear us. The creature did not seem to like this. It stopped laughing and grinned its mouth at us. The laughter seemed to slowly fade into a growl, like the same one a rabid dog would make. In a split second, this thing charged at us, galloping like a racehorse, sinking its teeth in my shorts. Luckily, it didn't touch my flesh, but it grabbed hold of my clothes, strong enough to pull me down with a flick of its head. It made a sound that sounded like a mix of growling and laughing, almost as if it was satisfied with how easy it took me down. It turned its attention to my friend, and charged at him too. In the process, it stepped on my back with one of its hooves, and it hurt like hell. I could almost feel a bruise coming up just seconds later. The next thing I know, both the creatures and my friend were wrestling on the ground, and I could hear the sound of tearing clothing. The beast was ripping his shirt apart, piece by piece. And suddenly, I heard a familiar sound and saw a blast of light coming from between them, and the creature let out a groan of pain and backed off from my friend. I could see him slowly get up without a shirt, with a taser in his hand that was still sparking. I never knew he carried one with him, but I was glad he did. For the next few seconds, the beast and my friend stared off at each other. The taser probably hurt it enough, because it slowly backed away and retreated into the bush. I thanked my friend and we quickly went back to camp. Some days later, I did some research on the internet and stumbled upon a mythical creature. Its physical appearance matched perfectly with the creature we had met. It said that this creature can mimic human speech to lure its victims, which would explain the cry for help we had heard. I'm almost certain that this creature is not just a myth, and there's at least one lurking somewhere in Nevada. Now, while that was my crazy encounter from Nevada, Missouri has its own fair share of nightmares to share. I'll have to send more in a separate email, but I've also seen similar creatures like this, what I saw in Nevada and Missouri. In fact, I think there are more out here, lurking around in the woods. I wanted to share with you my Nevada story to let you know that I have experience with cryptids, because recently, when I was in a cabin up in the wintertime here in Missouri, I caught something with large black eyes staring into my cabin window. I tried my best not to scream, but it only came around at night. Since I got out of the cabin and have come back down the mountainside for spring, I've not seen it since. Anyway, I could go on and on about all the stories I have with dealing with these monsters. They seem to follow me no matter what state I'm in. Let me know if you'd like to hear more, and I'll gladly write a bunch up for you. In 1992, I was living with my girlfriend, who is now my wife of 20 plus years. At the time, we lived in a small duplex in a little town outside of Edna, located outside of St. Louis. So, I was familiar with the whole legend of the Hawkman and other local sighting stories that had been popping up prior to our own sighting. Well, one afternoon, my wife and I were sitting on our couch watching TV. I remember it was around 3 p.m. As I said, we lived in a duplex, and the living room window is basically on the front corner of the house. We were sitting facing the window, and I just so happened to be looking out it when I saw what I thought was a very large flying object, or bird, flying very low, just south of our duplex. It was so large and so close, I thought it was going to smash into the roof of our apartment. We were on the second floor. But it pulled up and over a few trees, doing kind of a loop as it passed. It took about 5 seconds for my wife and I to process what we had just seen, and both came to the same conclusion. That was not a bird. The sighting has shocked us, scared us, and intrigued us both ever since. The fact that it was flying so low right in front of our house and looping over a few trees made it very real to us. I'm still not quite sure what we saw, but I'm confident this was possibly paranormal, or we really did see the Hawkman. I was hunting around 2012 November or December. I can't remember which one was which, but it wasn't too long ago, so I'm not sure why my memory is so blurry about the date. I was up in a tree stand, bow hunting for deer in the backwoods of Missouri. It was getting close to dusk, and I had not seen anything all day. I was just sitting there, dozing off a bit, when I heard something coming through the woods towards me. At first, I thought it was a deer, but then I noticed that it was walking on 2 legs and coming up the path towards where my tree stand is. I could see and make out that it was a large, hairy, dog-like creature, easily 8 feet tall and massive, rippling muscles. It was also walking upright, the same way a man would. I didn't know what to do. I sat there and watched it as it came closer. It was looking right up at me, and I could see its eyes. I was terrified. I couldn't move. Then, everything around me got quiet. I was too frightened to look out my deer stand to see if it was still there, so I sat there waiting for it to go away. I honestly don't know how long I waited, but eventually I must have dozed off. The next thing I know, the sounds of the forest start coming back. I was probably sitting up there for a good couple of hours before things returned to normal. I know it saw me. I know that for a fact. I don't know what it was, but it definitely was not a regular deer or wolf, or any other kind of animal I'd ever seen before. I called out to a couple of my buddies and told them what had happened. One of them said he knew somebody who had a very similar experience as I. He said the creature was called the Missouri Wildman. I never did find anything with that information because, honestly, after that day, I didn't think I wanted to know anything more. I just kind of want to forget that it ever happened. I never did see this thing again, but since that day, strange things have been happening around my house. Like, for example, I usually leave my porch light on at night, but ever since, this strange looming feeling sits around my house that makes me feel uncomfortable, like there's something there. There's even times that I swear I see those same red eyes staring back at me through the woodline by my house, or I get this overwhelming sensation that I'm being watched by something or someone. I can never get a good look at it, though. The whole thing has left me shaken. I'm still trying to find ways to process it after all these years. Because how do you handle something like this? Something that you're told your whole life doesn't exist, and then turns out to be true. So, I came across this subreddit based on the unexplained sightings and experiences when something happened with me that left me quite disturbed. I began to look it up on the internet, and I found a lot of the nighttime. Isolated accounts quite similar to what I had experienced just several weeks back. And it went something like this. Born and raised in Missouri, and I've always wanted to get a dog ever since I was little, but I couldn't get one. My mother was asthmatic, and my dad had a severe allergy to dogs. I moved out a few weeks ago and found myself a really great apartment, a room that I share with one of my friends. I had no intention of adopting a dog yet, but my friend, who's also my roommate, so I'll call him roommate in the story to avoid any confusion. He brought a few months old puppy with him one day. It was the most adorable thing I'd ever seen. The pupper looked like a mixed breed of German Shepherd and Border Collie. It was sleeping in my roommate's arms. I asked him if it was his. Much to my surprise, He told me that on his way back home, a car had hit its mother and the pupper was left behind. Since my roommate felt bad about it because he knew of my love for dogs, he brought it home for me. I was of course sad about the puppy, but at the same time, I was overjoyed at the fact that I could finally have a dog. I'm not really a morning person, so I try and sleep in for as long as I can before absolutely needing to get up out of bed. Getting a dog meant that I had to walk it out too. His name is Archie, by the way. The first week, Archie licked my face clean and would not stop unless I was out of bed. So what I found as a solution was that I walked Archie twice in 24 hours, once in the morning and once at night, so he wouldn't insist on going out so early in the morning. And it surprisingly has been working out quite well. A few days ago, when I was taking Archie out on a walk, there's a quiet, spooky cemetery we passed by. It has tall, creepy, incredibly dense trees. There's a footpath on the side. Then there's a road next to it, and then there are dense bushes on the other side of the road as well. We always walk on the footpath that's closer to the bushes, so the cemetery is on the far side of the road. We were walking there, and absolutely no noise around us. We try to be quiet as well so we don't disturb our neighbors. Archie and I start to walk past the cemetery when we hear a very loud rustling in one of the trees in the cemetery. Archie and I both stop and stare. The rustling and noise was too small to be that of an owl's or a bird's. Archie hid behind my legs and whimpered while I had my eyes glued the entire time at the tree, trying to find out exactly what it was. Then, I see a big shadow walk past, quickly, from a branch, towards the trunk of one of the trees. I could tell from that silhouette that it was illuminated by the full moon that night. I was scared, but I still wanted to know what the heck was jumping trees and who was doing it. I stayed rooted to the spot. It wasn't until I saw the figure crawl down the tree and fall with a loud thud in the bushes beneath. By that time, I had gotten the chills so bad, and my body was violently shaking. I no longer had an interest in finding out who or what it was, but I could not move. It was like something kept me there in my place. I heard the rustling get closer as the thing, whatever it was, ran out of the cemetery, crawling on all fours, crossing the road only to disappear in the bushes on my side. That was it. I grabbed my dog in my arms, running in the opposite direction as fast as I could. I kept looking back to see if the crawler thing was following me, and my heart almost stopped. I noticed it was. All I could see was reflective eyes and a creepy thing trying to catch up to me. Instinctively, I unbuckled Archie's collar, threw it back to him to aim at this crawler, but I didn't know if it hit him or not. I didn't turn around and keep running, going around corners. I stopped hearing the sound of steps behind me, after which I glanced back to check if it had finally given up, and I was so glad it wasn't there anymore. Without stopping to catch my breath, I still did not stop running the entire time, and took the longer route back to my apartment, which took like 15 more minutes of running. When I entered and slammed the door behind me, my roommate woke up from the noise, asking me what the matter was, since he saw the state I was in. I told him about the crawler. It didn't look like he believed me, but he agreed that he had heard of weird things from the cemetery and sightings nearby at night. He also said he always found it spooky, and what I saw could be an animal that was a false consolation. We both knew there's a city after a city where I live with no forest or trees or wild area or any sort of thing from where that thing could have came from. I know Missouri is wild, but I never knew it had things like this in it. Maybe I should move states.